Jake Thompson sat alone at the back corner table of Lincoln Middle School's cafeteria, carefully unwrapping his peanut butter sandwich. The brown paper bag crinkled softly as he pulled out an apple that had seen better days. Around him, the usual chaos of lunchtime buzzed with conversations, laughter, and the clatter of plastic trays. But Jake's table remained empty except for him. At 12 years old, Jake had grown accustomed to eating alone. His thick glasses, hand-me-down clothes, and quiet nature made him an easy target for the school's bullies. His mother worked long hours at what she called government jobs, and his father had left when Jake was just 5. The boy had learned to navigate the social minefield of middle school by staying invisible, keeping his head down and avoiding trouble. Across the cafeteria, Marcus Rodriguez held court at the popular kids' table. Tall for his age with perfectly styled hair and the latest sneakers, Marcus commanded attention wherever he went. His father owned 3 car dealerships in town, and Marcus never let anyone forget it. He wore designer clothes, carried the newest phone, and had a different expensive gadget every week. Marcus spotted Jake in his usual corner and nudged his friends. "Look at the charity case over there," he said loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "I bet his mom packed that sandwich with expired bread from the food bank." His crew of followers laughed on cue. Sarah Chen, who desperately wanted to fit in with Marcus's group, giggled nervously. Tommy Williams, Marcus's best friend since elementary school, added, "Maybe we should start a collection for him." "I've got some pennies in my backpack." Jake pretended not to hear, focusing intently on his sandwich. He had perfected the art of becoming invisible during these moments. His mother had taught him that some battles weren't worth fighting, especially when you were outnumbered. But the word still stung, creating a familiar knot in his stomach that made it hard to swallow his food. The harassment had started small at the beginning of 7th grade, a comment here, a snicker there. But as months passed, Marcus had grown bolder. He would accidentally bump into Jake in the hallways, knock his books to the floor, or make jokes about his appearance during class when teachers weren't looking. Jake never fought back, never told on Marcus, never gave him the reaction he seemed to crave. "Hey, Thompson," Marcus called out, standing up from his table. The cafeteria began to quiet as students sensed drama brewing. "I'm talking to you, Four Eyes." Jake slowly looked up, his heart racing. Through his thick glasses, he could see Marcus approaching with his usual swagger. The boy's expensive basketball shoes squeaked against the linoleum floor with each confident step. "I asked you a question," Marcus said, now standing directly across from Jake's table. "Where'd you get that fancy lunch? Did your mom finally get a real job, or are you still living off government handouts?" The cafeteria had gone nearly silent now. Even the lunch ladies had stopped their cleaning to watch. Jake could feel dozens of eyes on him, waiting to see what would happen next. His hands trembled slightly as he set down his sandwich. "Leave me alone, Marcus," Jake said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus laughed, a sound that carried across the silent room. "What did you say?" "I couldn't hear you over the sound of your stomach growling. Maybe if you spoke up instead of mumbling like a baby, people might actually want to be your friend?" Jake's face flushed red. He had dealt with Marcus's taunts for months, but something about today felt different. Maybe it was the way everyone was watching, or maybe he was just tired of being treated like he was invisible unless someone wanted to make fun of him. "I said, leave me alone," Jake repeated, this time loud enough for everyone to hear. Marcus's eyes lit up with excitement. Finally, he was getting a reaction. "Oh, look who found his voice. What are you going to do about it, Thompson? Run home and cry to mommy? Oh wait, she's probably too busy working 3 jobs to care about her loser son." The comment about his mother hit Jake like a physical blow. His hands clenched into fists under the table. His mother worked incredibly hard to provide for them, often coming home exhausted after long days that she never really talked about. She would help him with homework despite being tired, make sure he had everything he needed for school, and always found time to listen to his problems. "Don't talk about my mom," Jake said, standing up slowly. At full height, he was still several inches shorter than Marcus, but there was something in his voice that made Marcus pause for just a moment. "What's the matter? Did I hurt your feelings?" Marcus recovered quickly, playing to his audience. "Face it, Thompson. You're a nobody. Your dad ran away because he was embarrassed to have a son like you. Your mom works dead-end jobs because she's probably as pathetic as you are. You wear the same 3 shirts every week. You smell like a thrift store, and nobody at this school would even notice if you disappeared tomorrow." The words hung in the air like poison, Jake felt tears threatening to form behind his glasses, but he refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of everyone. He had promised himself long ago that he wouldn't give Marcus the satisfaction of seeing him cry. Around them, students pulled out their phones, ready to record whatever happened next. In the age of social media, a good fight or public humiliation could go viral within hours. Jake was trapped between his desire to defend himself and his mother's teachings about avoiding violence and staying out of trouble. Marcus stepped closer, invading Jake's personal space. "You know what your problem is, Thompson? You think you're better than everyone else just because you're quiet and get good grades. But the truth is, you're just scared. You're a coward who hides behind his books because he knows he can't handle the real world." The accusation of cowardice struck deeper than anything else Marcus had said. Jake wasn't a coward. He had been protecting himself and trying to avoid making his mother's life more difficult. But Marcus's words made him question everything he had been taught about taking the high road. The tension in the cafeteria reached a breaking point as Marcus continued his relentless verbal assault. Jake stood frozen, his whole body trembling with a mixture of anger, humiliation, and hurt. The circle of students around them had grown larger, with kids from other grades pushing forward to get a better view of the confrontation. "Cat, got your tongue again?" Marcus taunted, his confidence growing with each passing second of Jake's silence. "I knew it. All talk and no action. Just like I said. You're nothing but a scared little boy playing dress-up in his daddy's old clothes." Jake looked down at his shirt, a blue button-down that had indeed belonged to his father before he left. His mother had altered it to fit him better, spending her evening carefully hemming the sleeves and taking in the sides. She had been so proud when she presented it to him, saying he looked handsome and grown up. Now Marcus was turning even that small gesture of love into ammunition for his cruelty. "You want to know what I think?" Marcus continued, warming up to his audience. "I think your mom is probably ashamed of you too. That's why she works so much. She's trying to avoid coming home to see what a disappointment her son turned out to be." Something inside Jake snapped. The careful control he had maintained for months crumbled in an instant. "Shut up," he shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. "You don't know anything about my mom. She's worth 10 of you." Marcus grinned triumphantly. He had finally gotten under Jake's skin. "Oh, did I hit a nerve? What's she going to do? Come to school and fight your battles for you? I'd love to meet the woman who raised such a pathetic excuse for a son." "She's stronger than you'll ever be," Jake said, his voice shaking but determined. "She's been through things you couldn't even imagine." "Like what? Welfare lines? Unemployment offices?" Marcus laughed, playing to the crowd. "My dad says people like your mom are what's wrong with this country. Always looking for handouts instead of working for what they want." The crowd of students had formed a complete circle now, blocking any escape route. Some were recording with their phones, others were whispering excitedly to friends who had just arrived. The lunch supervisors seemed to have vanished, leaving the boys to face off without adult intervention. Jake's mind raced with responses, but he couldn't find words strong enough to defend his mother without revealing things she had made him promise to keep secret. He couldn't tell Marcus about the late-night phone calls that sometimes woke him up, or the way his mother would pace the living room afterward, her face tight with stress. He couldn't explain the medals and certificates she kept locked in a box in her closet, or why she sometimes woke up from nightmares calling out names he didn't recognize. "You know what I think?" Marcus pressed on, sensing victory. "I think your mom is probably cleaning toilets somewhere, pretending she's too good for charity while living off food stamps. I bet she tells you stories about having important jobs just to make you feel better about being poor." "Stop it," Jake whispered, but his voice was lost in the noise of the excited crowd. Marcus stepped even closer, now only inches away from Jake's face. "What was that?" "I couldn't hear you over the sound of your mom scrubbing floors for a living." "I said stop it," Jake yelled, pushing Marcus backward with both hands. Marcus stumbled but quickly regained his balance. The physical contact had crossed a line and everyone in the cafeteria knew it. The crowd pressed in closer, sensing that things were about to escalate beyond words. "Did you just put your hands on me?" Marcus asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Nobody touches me, especially not some charity case whose mom probably doesn't even know who his real father is." Jake lunged forward, but Tommy Williams and another boy grabbed his arms, holding him back. "Let me go." Jake struggled against their grip, his glasses sliding down his nose. "Look at him," Marcus addressed the crowd like a performer on stage. getting all worked up because someone told him the truth about his pathetic family. This is what happens when kids don't have proper fathers to teach them how to be men. Sarah Chen, who had been watching with growing discomfort, finally spoke up. Marcus, maybe that's enough. You made your point. Marcus whirled around to face her. Are you defending him? What, do you feel sorry for the orphan boy? Maybe you should go sit with him and share your lunch money. Sarah's face turned red and she quickly looked away. Standing up to Marcus meant risking her own social standing. And she wasn't prepared to make that sacrifice for someone she barely knew. Nobody's going to save you. Thompson, Marcus continued, turning back to Jake. Not your girlfriend, not your teachers, and definitely not your mom. You're all alone just like you deserve to be. Jake stopped struggling against the boys holding him. The fight seemed to drain out of him all at once, replaced by a deep sadness that settled in his chest like a stone. Marcus was right about one thing. He was alone. He had always been alone, even in a room full of people. That's what I thought, Marcus said, mistaking Jake's stillness for surrender. All bark and no bite. Just like his mom probably taught him. Be quiet, keep your head down, and maybe the world won't notice what a loser you are. The boys released Jake's arms and he slumped back into his chair. His sandwich sat on the table, forgotten and growing stale. Around him, the crowd began to disperse as the excitement died down. Some students looked disappointed that there hadn't been an actual fight, while others seemed relieved that things hadn't gotten worse. Marcus straightened his shirt and ran a hand through his hair, making sure he still looked perfect. Remember this moment, Thompson, he said, loud enough for everyone still watching to hear. This is what happens when you try to step up to someone who's actually worth something. Maybe next time you'll think twice before opening your mouth. As Marcus walked back to his table with his friends, Jake sat alone once again, but this time the isolation felt different. It wasn't just the familiar loneliness he had grown used to. It was the crushing weight of humiliation and the bitter taste of words he couldn't take back. He had broken his mother's cardinal rule about staying out of trouble, and for what? Marcus was still the same bully he had always been, and Jake was still sitting alone with a half-eaten sandwich and the stares of his classmates. The rest of the school day passed in a blur for Jake. Word of the cafeteria confrontation had spread throughout Lincoln Middle School like wildfire. Students who had never spoken to him before now whispered and pointed as he walked through the hallways. Some looked at him with pity, others with amusement, and a few with the kind of second-hand embarrassment that comes from witnessing someone's public humiliation. By the time the final bell rang, Jake felt like he was carrying the weight of the entire school's judgment on his shoulders. He gathered his books slowly, hoping to avoid the rush of students heading for the exits. The last thing he wanted was to encounter Marcus and his friends again, especially with so many witnesses around to record whatever happened next. As he made his way to his locker, Jake noticed Mrs. Peterson, his English teacher, watching him with concern. She had always been kind to him, often staying after class to discuss the books he was reading or to offer encouragement on his writing assignments. But today, even her sympathetic smile felt like a spotlight on his shame. Jake, she called softly as he passed her classroom. Could I speak with you for a moment? He paused, considering pretending he hadn't heard her, but Mrs. Peterson had never been anything but supportive. Reluctantly, he stepped into her classroom where she was erasing the day's lesson from the whiteboard. I heard about what happened at lunch, she said gently, not turning around to face him. Are you all right? Jake adjusted his glasses and stared at his shoes. I'm fine, he mumbled, though they both knew it wasn't true. Mrs. Peterson set down her eraser and turned to face him. Her expression was kind but serious. You know, Jake, sometimes the hardest thing about being different is that it makes you a target for people who are insecure about themselves. Marcus isn't insecure, Jake said bitterly. He's popular and rich and confident. He has everything, does he? Mrs. Peterson asked. I've been teaching for 15 years, Jake. I've seen a lot of bullies come and go. They all have one thing in common. They tear others down because it's the only way they know how to build themselves up. Jake wanted to believe her, but Marcus's words still echoed in his mind. Maybe he really was everything the older boy had said. A loser, a nobody, a burden on his mother's life. Sometimes, Mrs. Peterson continued, the people who seem the strongest are actually fighting the biggest battles. Don't let someone else's cruelty make you question your own worth. As Jake walked home from school, he replayed the conversation in his mind. Mrs. Peterson meant well, but she didn't understand what it was like to be him. She didn't know what it felt like to be the kid everyone either ignored or mocked, the one whose father had walked away without a second thought, the one whose mother worked mysterious jobs that kept her away for long hours. The small apartment Jake shared with his mother was located in the older part of town, where the buildings needed fresh paint and the parking lots had more cracks than asphalt. It wasn't the worst neighborhood, but it was a far cry from the sprawling houses with manicured lawns where kids like Marcus lived. Jake climbed the 3 flights of stairs to apartment 3B, his footsteps echoing in the empty stairwell. He fumbled with his key, his hand still shaking slightly from the day's events. The familiar scent of his mother's vanilla candles greeted him as he stepped inside. But the apartment was quiet and empty. A note on the kitchen counter, written in his mother's neat handwriting, explained that she would be working late again. There was money for pizza and a reminder to finish his homework before watching television. Jake crumpled the note and tossed it in the trash, feeling more alone than ever. He tried to focus on his math homework, but the numbers blurred together on the page. Every time he closed his eyes, he could see Marcus's smug face and hear the laughter of his classmates. The worst part wasn't even the humiliation. It was the nagging feeling that maybe Marcus was right about some things. As evening approached, Jake heard his mother's key in the lock. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Thompson stepped through the door, still wearing her civilian clothes but carrying herself with the perfect posture that never seemed to leave her, even after long days at work. At 42, she maintained the athletic build and sharp awareness that had served her well during her military career. "Hey, sweetheart," she called, setting down her briefcase and hanging her jacket on the hook by the door. "How was school today?" Jake looked up from his homework and his mother immediately noticed something was wrong. Her maternal instincts, honed by years of reading people and situations, kicked in instantly. "What happened?" she asked, her voice shifting to the tone of concern that Jake knew meant she wouldn't accept a simple nothing as an answer. For a moment, Jake considered lying. He could make up a story about a difficult test or a forgotten assignment. But the events of the day had left him emotionally drained, and the need to talk to someone who actually cared about him overwhelmed his desire to protect her from worry. "There was this kid at school," he began hesitantly. "Marcus Rodriguez. He was saying things about you, about us, about how we're poor and you're probably ashamed of me." Sarah's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. In her years of military service, she had faced enemy combatants, survived hostile environments, and led soldiers through impossible situations. But nothing had ever made her angrier than someone hurting her son. "What kind of things?" she asked, sitting down at the kitchen table across from Jake. Jake told her everything. The months of harassment, the escalating taunts, and finally the humiliating confrontation in the cafeteria. With each detail, he watched his mother's face grow more serious, though she maintained the calm exterior that had become second nature to her. "And what did you do?" she asked when he finished. "I tried to defend you," Jake said miserably, "but I just made it worse. Everyone was watching and I couldn't think of anything to say that would make him stop. He kept saying you were probably cleaning toilets or living off welfare, and I wanted to tell him about your real job, but I knew I couldn't." Sarah reached across the table and took her son's hand. Her grip was strong and calloused from years of training and service, but her touch was gentle. "You did the right thing by not revealing classified information," she said firmly. "And you did the right thing by trying to defend me. But Jake, you don't ever have to fight my battles. I've been taking care of myself for a long time." "But he was so mean," Jake said, his voice cracking with renewed emotion. "And everyone just stood there and watched. Nobody tried to help me." Sarah squeezed his hand tighter. "Sometimes, honey, people don't know how to help. And sometimes they're too scared of becoming targets themselves. That doesn't make it right, but it makes them human." They sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the weight of the day's events settling between them. Outside their apartment window, the sounds of the neighborhood provided a familiar backdrop. Children playing in the courtyard, cars starting up as parents returned from work, the distant hum of traffic from the main road. "Mom," Jake said finally, "are you ashamed of me? For not being stronger? For not standing up to him better?" The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had spent years protecting her son from the harsh realities of her work and the world in general, but she had never considered that her desire to keep him safe might make him feel weak or inadequate. Sarah Thompson looked at her son with an intensity that made Jake understand, for just a moment, why she had earned the respect of soldiers and commanding officers throughout her military career. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "Jacob Michael Thompson," she said, using his full name in the way that always got his attention. "I have never been more proud of anyone in my entire life than I am of you." "Every single day," Jake blinked in surprise. This wasn't the answer he had expected. "You think I'm ashamed of you?" Sarah continued. "Son, you are the strongest person I know. You face bullies with grace. You excel in school despite dealing with challenges that would break most adults. You show kindness to others even when they don't show it to you. You are everything I could have hoped for in a child and more." "But I'm not tough like you," Jake protested. "I don't fight back. I don't stand up for myself the way you probably did when you were my age." Sarah smiled, but there was sadness in her eyes. "Jake, there are different kinds of strength. Physical toughness is just one type, and honestly, it's often the least important. The strength to keep going when people try to tear you down. The strength to maintain your values when others abandon theirs. The strength to show compassion in a cruel world. Those are the qualities that matter most." She paused, seeming to weigh her words carefully. "I've seen men who could bench press twice their body weight crumble under pressure. I've seen soldiers who were fearless in combat fall apart when faced with emotional challenges. But you, my sweet boy, you face adversity every day and keep moving forward. That's real courage." Jake felt tears threatening again, but this time they weren't tears of humiliation. "I just wish I could make him stop. I wish I could make him see that what he's saying isn't true." "Some people can't be reasoned with," Sarah said gently. "Some people are so hurt or angry or insecure that they lash out at anyone they perceive as vulnerable. But Jake, that's their problem, not yours. You can't control other people's behavior, but you can control your response to it." "What should I do?" Jake asked. "I have to see him every day at school. Everyone saw what happened today. I don't know how to face them tomorrow." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her military training kicking in as she analyzed the situation like a tactical problem that needed solving. She had dealt with difficult personalities and hostile environments throughout her career. But this was different. This was her child being targeted, and the protective instincts that she had learned to control in professional settings were much harder to manage when it came to Jake. "First," she said finally, "you hold your head high. You have nothing to be ashamed of. You defended your family with honor, and that's something to be proud of. But what if he does it again? What if it gets worse? Then we'll deal with it together," Sarah said firmly. "And Jake, if this boy ever crosses the line from verbal harassment to physical violence, you have my permission to defend yourself. I've taught you some basic self-defense for a reason." It was true. Since Jake was young, Sarah had taught him simple defensive moves. How to break free from grabs, how to create distance from an attacker, how to strike effectively if absolutely necessary. She had framed it as general safety knowledge, but Jake had always suspected it was because of her work and the potential dangers that might come with it. "I don't want to hurt anyone," Jake said quietly. "And that's exactly why I'm proud of you," Sarah replied. "Violence should always be a last resort. But son, there's a difference between being peaceful and being helpless. You have the right to protect yourself if someone tries to harm you." That evening, as they shared a late dinner of Chinese takeout, Sarah found herself thinking about the conversation more deeply. She had seen too much of the world's darkness in her years of service to be naive about human nature. Bullies like Marcus Rodriguez often escalated their behavior when they didn't get the reaction they wanted. If Jake continued to take the high road, there was a good chance Marcus would eventually push things too far. "Jake," she said as they cleaned up the empty containers, "I want you to do something for me. If this situation gets worse, if this boy threatens you or puts his hands on you in any way, I want you to call me immediately, day or night, no matter where I am or what I'm doing. Do you understand?" Jake nodded, though he wasn't sure he would actually follow through. His mother already worried about him enough, and he knew her work was important, even if he didn't fully understand what it involved. "Promise me," Sarah pressed, recognizing the hesitation in his expression. "I promise," Jake said, meaning it this time. The next morning arrived too quickly. Jake lay in bed listening to his mother moving around the apartment, getting ready for another long day at work. The familiar sounds of her morning routine, the coffee maker gurgling to life, the soft thud of her running shoes as she did her daily exercises in the living room, the quiet efficiency with which she prepared for whatever challenges awaited her, usually comforted him. Today they only reminded him that soon he would have to face the aftermath of yesterday's humiliation. Sarah knocked softly on his bedroom door. "Jake, you need to get up for school." "I'm awake," he called back, though he made no move to get out of bed. She opened the door and stepped into his room, already dressed in her typical civilian work clothes. Dark slacks, a crisp white shirt, and a blazer that somehow managed to look both professional and practical. "Second thoughts about facing the day?" she asked with understanding. "Maybe I could stay home sick," Jake suggested hopefully. "Just for today to let things cool down." Sarah sat on the edge of his bed. "You could, but hiding from a problem rarely makes it go away. Usually it just makes the problem feel bigger and scarier than it actually is." Jake knew she was right, but the thought of walking into school and facing the stares and whispers felt overwhelming. "What if I told you a secret?" Sarah asked suddenly. Jake looked up at her with curiosity. His mother rarely shared details about her work or her past. "When I was about your age, maybe a year older, there was a girl at my school named Bethany Parker. She was everything I wasn't. Popular, beautiful, from a wealthy family. She made my life miserable for almost 2 years." "What did she do?" Jake asked, surprised to learn that his strong, confident mother had once faced a situation similar to his own. "Everything you can imagine. She mocked my clothes, which were mostly hand-me-downs from cousins. She made fun of the fact that my mom worked 2 jobs to support us. She spread rumors about me, excluded me from social events, and generally made sure everyone knew I was beneath her notice." "How did you make it stop?" Sarah smiled, but there was something sharp in her expression. "I'll tell you the rest of that story later. Right now you need to get ready for school. But Jake, remember what I told you last night. You are stronger than you know, and you are never as alone as you feel." The morning at Lincoln Middle School started like any other, but Jake could feel the difference immediately. Students who normally ignored him now whispered as he passed, their eyes following him down the hallway. Some looked sympathetic, others amused, and a few seemed genuinely curious about what would happen next in the ongoing drama between him and Marcus. Jake made it through his first 3 classes without incident, though he could barely concentrate on the lessons. His mind kept wandering to his mother's unfinished story about Bethany Parker and wondering what advice she might have given him if she had time to complete it. During the break between 3rd and 4th period, Jake was gathering his books from his locker when he sensed someone approaching behind him. He turned to find Marcus Rodriguez flanked by his usual crew of followers. The hallway suddenly felt much smaller and more crowded. "Well, well," Marcus said with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "If it isn't yesterday's entertainment. How are you feeling today, Thompson? Still ready to fight the world for Mommy's honor?" Jake closed his locker door slowly, his heart rate beginning to increase. "I don't want any trouble, Marcus." "Of course you don't," Marcus replied. "That's your problem right there. You never want any trouble. You just want to hide in your little corner and pretend the world owes you something." A small crowd was beginning to gather again, drawn by the familiar tension between the 2 boys. Jake noticed that several students had their phones out, ready to record whatever happened next for social media consumption. "You know what I was thinking about last night?" Marcus continued conversationally, as if they were old friends catching up. "I was thinking about how pathetic it must be to have a mom who's so ashamed of her job that she can't even tell her own son what she does for a living." Jake's jaw tightened. "You don't know anything about my mother." "I know enough," Marcus shot back. "I know she drops you off 3 blocks away from school so nobody sees her beat-up car. I know she shops at thrift stores and pretends it's a choice. I know she probably lies awake at night wondering where she went wrong raising such a disappointment." The words hit their target with surgical precision. Jake felt his carefully maintained composure beginning to crack again, just as it had the day before. "Take it back," Jake said quietly, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "Or what?" Marcus stepped closer, his voice dropping to a challenging whisper. "What are you going to do about it? Run home and tell your mom that the mean boy was saying true things about your pathetic life?" Tommy Williams and another boy moved to flank Jake, cutting off potential escape routes. The hallway had gone quiet except for the soft sounds of phones recording and the distant noise from classrooms where teachers continued their lessons. Unaware of the confrontation building in the corridor. "You want to know what I really think?" Marcus asked, his confidence growing as he sensed Jake's mounting frustration. "I think your mom isn't working late nights at some important job. I think she's probably out looking for your dad. begging him to come back and help her deal with the mistake she made 12 years ago. The reference to his father struck Jake like a physical blow. His mother had always been careful not to speak badly about the man who had abandoned them. But Jake had always wondered if his father left because of him, because he wasn't good enough or strong enough or worth staying for. "Stop," Jake said, but his voice lacked conviction. "The truth hurts, doesn't it?" Marcus pressed on. "Face it, Thompson. Even your own father couldn't stand to be around you. Why would anyone else want to?" Something inside Jake snapped. All the careful lessons his mother had taught him about avoiding violence, all the strategies for walking away from confrontation, all the wisdom about taking the high road disappeared in a surge of anger and hurt that he could no longer contain. "Shut up," Jake shouted, pushing Marcus hard in the chest. Marcus stumbled backward but quickly regained his balance. His eyes lit up with excitement and satisfaction. Finally, Jake Thompson was giving him the reaction he had been working toward for months. "There it is," Marcus exclaimed, straightening his shirt. "There's that famous Thompson temper. Did I strike a nerve talking about Daddy Dearest?" Jake lunged forward again, but this time Marcus was ready for him. The older boy grabbed Jake's wrists and twisted, forcing him to his knees in the middle of the hallway. The crowd pressed closer, phones capturing every moment of Jake's humiliation. "Look at him," Marcus announced to his audience. "Down on his knees where he belongs. This is what happens when bottom feeders try to swim with the sharks." Jake struggled against Marcus's grip, but the other boy was stronger and had leverage on his side. Tears of frustration and anger blurred his vision, and he could hear the excited whispers of students sharing the spectacle on their social media accounts in real time. "Let me go," Jake gasped, his glasses sliding down his nose as he twisted in Marcus's grasp. "Say please," Marcus demanded. "Say please and admit that everything I said about you and your family is true." "Never," Jake managed through gritted teeth. Marcus tightened his grip, causing Jake to wince in pain. "Then I guess we'll stay here until you learn some manners. Maybe after school I'll pay a visit to wherever your mom works. I'd love to meet the woman who raised such a stubborn little—" "Is there a problem here?" The voice cut through the noise of the crowd like a blade, causing everyone to freeze. It was calm, controlled, and carried an unmistakable tone of authority that made even Marcus release his grip on Jake's wrists and turn around. Standing at the end of the hallway was a woman that none of the students recognized. She appeared to be in her early 40s with short brown hair and an athletic build. She wore simple civilian clothes, dark jeans and a navy blue sweater. But something about the way she carried herself commanded immediate attention. Her posture was perfect, her gaze steady and assessing, and she moved with the fluid confidence of someone accustomed to dangerous situations. "I asked if there was a problem," the woman repeated, her voice never rising above conversational level but somehow filling the entire corridor. Marcus straightened up, trying to regain his composure and authority. He was used to intimidating adults as well as students, particularly teachers and school staff who seemed more concerned with avoiding conflict than addressing it. "No problem," he said with forced casualness. "Just having a conversation with my friend Jake here." The woman's eyes moved from Marcus to Jake, who was still on his knees in the middle of the hallway, his glasses askew and his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. When her gaze returned to Marcus, there was something in her expression that made several students instinctively take a step backward. "It didn't look like a conversation," she observed quietly. "It looked like assault." Marcus laughed, but the sound was forced and nervous. "Lady, I don't know who you are, but you might want to mind your own business. This is between me and him." The woman tilted her head slightly, studying Marcus with the kind of attention that made him deeply uncomfortable. When she spoke again, her voice was still calm, but there was an undercurrent of something that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. "My name is Sarah Thompson," she said evenly, "and Jake is my son." The hallway fell into complete silence. Even the sounds from nearby classrooms seemed to fade as every student within earshot processed what they had just heard. Marcus Rodriguez, who had spent months mocking Jake's mother and making assumptions about her character and occupation, was now face to face with the woman herself. Sarah Thompson took a step forward, and something in the way she moved made Marcus instinctively take a step back. There was no wasted motion, no theatrical gestures, just the measured advance of someone who had spent years training for exactly these kinds of confrontations. "Jake," Sarah said without taking her eyes off Marcus. "Are you hurt?" Jake scrambled to his feet, adjusting his glasses and trying to process the fact that his mother was somehow here, in his school, witnessing the humiliation he had tried so hard to protect her from. "Mom, what are you doing here?" he asked, his voice cracking with a mixture of relief and mortification. "Principal Martinez called me," Sarah replied calmly. "Apparently there was an incident yesterday that wasn't properly addressed. I came to discuss it with the administration and happened to arrive just in time to witness this little display." Marcus was staring at Sarah with growing confusion and unease. This wasn't the woman he had imagined based on his cruel assumptions. She didn't look like someone who cleaned toilets or relied on government assistance. She looked like someone who could break him in half without breaking a sweat. "You're Jake's mom?" Marcus asked, his earlier confidence evaporating rapidly. "Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Thompson, United States Army Special Forces," Sarah replied matter-of-factly. "Retired, but the training tends to stick." The color drained from Marcus's face. Around them, students began to murmur and whisper as the reality of the situation sank in. Jake's mother wasn't a cleaning lady or a welfare recipient. She was a decorated military officer who had served in some of the most dangerous places in the world. "Now," Sarah continued, her voice still conversational but somehow more intimidating than if she had been shouting, "I believe you were in the middle of saying something about my son and my family. Please continue. I'm very interested to hear your thoughts." Marcus opened his mouth, but no words came out. All the cruel taunts and clever insults that had flowed so easily when he was picking on a smaller, weaker target seemed to have deserted him now that he was facing someone who could actually fight back. "What's the matter?" Sarah asked, tilting her head with mock concern. "You seemed to have so much to say about my character and my parenting just a moment ago. Don't tell me you've suddenly lost your voice." Tommy Williams and the other boys who had been backing up Marcus began to inch away, sensing that their friend was on his own in this confrontation. The crowd of students pressed closer, but now they were watching Marcus's discomfort rather than Jake's humiliation. We were just," Marcus stammered, looking around desperately for support that wasn't coming. "You were just what?" Sarah pressed. "Just assaulting my son? Just spreading lies about my family? Just being a coward who picks on people smaller than himself?" Each word hit Marcus like a physical blow. He had built his entire social identity around being the alpha, the one who dominated others through intimidation and cruelty. But standing in front of Jake's mother, he felt like a child caught in a lie by a disappointed parent. "Mrs. Thompson." "I didn't know," Marcus began. "Lieutenant Colonel Thompson," Sarah corrected sharply. "And what exactly didn't you know? That actions have consequences? That the people you hurt have families who love them? That someday you might have to answer for your behavior?" Jake watched in amazement as his mother systematically dismantled Marcus's confidence without raising her voice or making a single threat. This was a side of her he had never seen before. Not the gentle, caring mother who helped him with homework and made him feel safe, but the soldier who had earned the respect and fear of enemies around the world. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Marcus said weakly, trying to salvage some dignity from the situation. "No misunderstanding," Sarah replied. "I've been watching for the past 5 minutes. I saw you physically restrain my son. I heard you making threats about visiting me at work. I witnessed you humiliating a child half your size while your friends held him down." Marcus looked around desperately, but the crowd that had cheered his bullying of Jake was now watching his own humiliation with fascination. Several students were still recording, and Marcus realized with growing horror that his defeat would be shared just as widely as Jake's had been. "You want to know about my work?" Sarah asked, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I spent 12 years in special operations. I've been deployed to places you can't pronounce, fighting people who would eat you alive before breakfast. I've led soldiers through hostile territory, completed missions that are still classified, and earned commendations that most people will never see." She took another step closer to Marcus, who seemed to shrink with each word. "But you know what the hardest job I've ever had is? Being a single mother to a boy who comes home every day trying to hide the fact that cowards like you make his life miserable. A boy who worries about defending me against people who don't know the first thing about honor or courage or sacrifice." Marcus was trembling now, whether from fear or shame or both. The persona he had crafted so carefully was crumbling in front of his peers, and he had no idea how to stop it. "I believe you owe my son an apology," Sarah said firmly. "I'm sorry," Marcus whispered, but his eyes were fixed on the floor. "Look at him when you speak," Sarah commanded with the tone of someone accustomed to being obeyed instantly. Marcus raised his eyes to meet Jake's, and for the first time in months, there was no cruelty or mockery in his expression. He looked like what he actually was, a frightened 13-year-old boy who had finally encountered someone stronger than himself. "I'm sorry, Jake," he said, his voice barely audible. "I'm sorry for everything." Jake nodded, not trusting his voice to work properly. The boy who had seemed so powerful and untouchable just minutes before now looked small and vulnerable. "And I believe you have something to say about the lies you've been spreading about my family," Sarah continued. "They weren't true," Marcus admitted. "I made it all up. I don't know anything about you or your job or your family. I was just being mean." "Why?" Sarah asked. "Why did you feel the need to torment my son?" Marcus struggled with the question, clearly unprepared for this level of accountability. "I don't know," he said finally. I guess it made me feel better about myself." "Did it work?" Sarah asked quietly. Marcus looked around at the faces watching him, some sympathetic, some disgusted, all seeing him in a completely different light than they had just minutes before. "No," he whispered. "It didn't work." Sarah studied him for a long moment, her military training helping her assess whether his contrition was genuine or just another manipulation. "Marcus Rodriguez," she said finally, "you have a choice to make. You can continue being the kind of person who hurts others to make himself feel powerful, or you can decide to be better. But understand this. If you ever touch my son again, if you ever threaten him or spread lies about my family, you won't be dealing with a school administrator or a teacher. You'll be dealing with me, and I promise you that's not a conversation you want to have." The threat was delivered so calmly that it was all the more terrifying. Marcus nodded frantically, desperate to escape this nightmare. "Now," Sarah continued, "I suggest you go find a teacher and report what happened here. All of it. Take responsibility for your actions and accept whatever consequences come your way." Marcus nodded again and hurried away, his former followers trailing behind him like lost puppies. The crowd of students began to disperse, chattering excitedly about what they had just witnessed. Sarah turned to Jake, her expression softening immediately from military commander back to concerned mother. "Are you all right?" she asked, reaching out to straighten his glasses and check him for injuries. "I'm fine," Jake said, though his hands were still shaking slightly. "Mom, how did you—" "I told you I'd always be there when you needed me," Sarah said simply, "and I meant it." As they walked toward the principal's office together, Jake felt something he hadn't experienced in months: pride. Not just in his mother, though watching her handle Marcus had been incredible, but in himself. He had stood up for what was right, even when it was difficult. He had defended his family's honor, even when he was outnumbered and outmatched. "Mom," he said as they reached the office door, "what happened with Bethany Parker? How did you make her stop?" Sarah smiled, and for the first time all day it reached her eyes. "I joined the army and learned how to be stronger than my enemies. But Jake, you're already stronger than yours. You just needed to remember it."